Welcome to the Dom Sub Devotion Podcast. Every episode of Dom Sub Devotion is an authentic reflection of our real life in a loving 24/7 DS marriage. If you crave the passion and intensity of a power exchange dynamic inside of a deeply loving and intimate relationship, you've found the right place. You can always find more from us in the show notes and at infinitedevotion.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to Dom Sub Devotion. In this week's episode, I'm going to give you the number one, far and away, most impactful thing that I have ever done or learned as a dominant man, and how it has helped me in my relationship with my wife and submissive, and how it's helped me to have better relationships with women in general in all parts of my life. And that is to keep track of and understand a woman's hormonal cycle. Now, why the hell is this the most impactful and most valuable thing? First and foremost, to be a dominant man, we have to be masters of observation. We have to be masterful with acceptance of reality and the truth, so that we can lead from the truth, so that we can lead forward in a way that works with reality. In order to do that, we have to be able to come to a place where we have a profound acceptance of reality. We have to work with what is, rather than working against what is, in all parts of life. And in general, we have to understand the woman who we are asking to submit to us. We have to understand her unique individual nature. We have to have some acceptance for the parts of her that make her a woman, that make her what she is. We can't just expect submission because we command it. Submission is a reaction. It's an expression of how she feels, not something that she just does. Now, if you're in kink only, submission as an action or as a performance or as a role play might be just fine. And if that's what you're looking for, what I'm going to talk about here today isn't for you. If what you're looking for is a relationship with a woman who submits to you and follows you in life, then this is the magic bullet. And I don't use those words flippantly. This is by far the most impactful thing that I've ever done as a man, and the most impactful thing in my relationship. We have to deal with reality and lead forward from reality. And a woman's hormonal cycle is at the absolute basis of what makes her a woman. This is the biological truth of what makes her a woman. And there's no more important thing for us to understand than the fact that men and women are different. We're opposites. We're built to be very different. When we work with those differences and celebrate them and allow them to be helpful rather than looking at them as a problem, we can have so much better experience in our relationships and in our dominant submissive dynamics. And when we look at a woman's hormonal cycle, a lot of times as men, we will think cycle, we're just thinking about those 5 to 7 days when she has her period. But the reality is that a woman's hormones are changing throughout the entire month. Every single day of her month, from the day that she starts her period until the day that she starts her next period, every single day, she is in a different hormonal makeup than she was in the day before. Every single day. If you want a visual of this, click into the show notes, and I will have a download there for you that will give you some visuals. You can also just Google female hormonal changes and look at the chart of how the different hormones in her body change throughout the month. Testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, all of the different hormones that are impacting her are different from day to day to day to day, all throughout the month. And if you have ever had any challenges as a man with hormonal imbalances, which I have, you know how dramatically altering and mind and life altering it can be when your hormones are out of alignment and when they're in alignment. It changes everything. I know that when my hormones in the past were really out of whack, I felt very weak, lazy, unmotivated. I had troubles with weight. I had all sorts of challenges that were hormonal in nature. They were based in hormonal problems. And as I got my hormonal problems sorted out and straightened out, everything else in my life got better. It got easier. It worked the way it was supposed to. These changes impact every part of our life. And when we can just have this single solitary baseline understanding of the fact that a woman's hormones are different from day to day to day, we can have so much more compassion and empathy for her. We can understand her in a completely different way. As a man, our hormones are generally the same every single day. The cycle that we go through hormonally is a 24-hour cycle. We can also analogize this with the sun, the solar cycle. Every day the sun comes up, every day the sun goes down, the next day it happens over again, and it's generally the same from day to day to day. And that fits very well with the world that we live in and the way that the world operates. The world is kind of built to be the same, to be consistent on a day-to-day basis. But for a woman, her hormones, again, are different today than they were yesterday, and they'll be different tomorrow than they are today. So when she wakes up tomorrow, her hormones won't be similar to what they are tomorrow until she is at the same point in her monthly cycle a month from now. Every single day until then, they're going to be different. So there are a couple of things that just result from this hormonal cycle and the way that it works that make a woman work very differently than a man. And I'm going to give a couple of different analogies here. These analogies are meant to kind of help explain and illustrate how this is different for a woman than it is for a man. The first analogy is the analogy of the seasons. If you think about the different phases of her cycle, I'll go into these in a little more depth a little bit later in this episode. But there are 4 general phases of her cycle. There's menstruation, there's the follicular phase, there's the ovulation phase, and there's the luteal phase. Now, even these are not fixed. The hormonal makeup during the follicular phase, for example, is changing still every day, but they're more similar to each other in that phase than in the later phases. So the first phase being menstruation, we can use the analogy of this being like winter. Everything, in winter, leaves are off the trees, the bears are hibernating, everything's quiet, everything's calm, it's a little darker. And that is the analogy to the menstruation phase. The follicular phase then analogizes to springtime. Buds coming on the trees, flowers are starting to bloom, everything's coming back to life, coming out of winter. And a woman will do this as she comes out of her menstruation phase into her follicular phase. She will start to have more energy. She'll start to have more, feel a little bit more alive and a little bit more vibrant. When she moves into her ovulation phase, this is going to be when she's at her highest energy, and this is the analogy of summertime. This is the summer parties, the backyard barbecues. This is all of the fun of summer. And then the luteal phase is the analogy of autumn or fall. And this is when things start to fall away. It's when Her energy will start to decrease. It's when she will sometimes have more emotional changes and fluctuations because her hormonal makeup changes faster and more drastically during this luteal phase than in any other part of her month. And then she comes back into winter, back into menstruation. And so this is a normal, natural flow. She's made to be different from day to day to day and in each of these different phases. The reality is, though, that most women live their lives much more in alignment with the solar cycle. And now I say solar cycle because, again, that's a 24-hour cycle. She operates on a 28 to 29 to 30-day cycle. I'll talk a little bit about tracking this and how you track it and why you track it, again, towards the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that. But she operates on a cycle that's roughly 28 days, which is about how long it takes for the moon to go through one full cycle. From full moon to full moon is about 28 days. So she goes through this cycle that is a month long before she comes back to being the same again. And this is normal. What's very abnormal for a woman in her hormonal reality is to wake up every day and do the same thing, to be expected to be the same, to take the same actions, to live the same way, to follow through on all of the same ways of living that she does every other day. Now, our world, our society, our culture tends to be built around people being the same every day. But when she's not the same every day and has to force herself to act and live as though she is, this is where a lot of the stress, the tension, the anxiety, and just the overall problems that women can seem like they have more of, a lot of that comes from this stress or this tension of living her life in direct contradiction to the reality of her biology. Now, there's another analogy to the 28-day cycle that I want to give you, and that's just kind of the analogy of the day. For us as men, again, we go through that cycle in 24 hours. She goes through it in 28 days. So we can think about her menstruation phase as sleeping. We can think about her follicular phase as waking up. Ovulation is the middle of the day, the brightest sunshine, the most activity. And then the luteal phase going into evening when we start to calm down, rest, relax, maybe sit down and watch a movie, and then sleep again in the menstruation phase. Now, this analogy is really helpful for me in understanding Dawn and in understanding women in general, because when I can realize that they are going through this cycle that is 28 times roughly slower than mine, I can understand and accept and have compassion for the fact that she, for example, is going to move through things and process things a lot more slowly than me. I remember saying to Dawn one time that her slowness challenges my neediness. If there's something where I'm getting needy or pushy or forceful, or I'm having expectations that she should be different than she is, if I'm trusting that she is working through this and I understand that the way that she goes through things is so much more slow than how I go through things, then her slowness is going to challenge my neediness. If I'm trying to lead her somewhere and it's taking her a while to go there with me, that's okay. That's to be expected. It's normal. And the only way for it to be real for her, rather than for her to force herself into a box, is for her to go at the pace of her body. If I can accept that, I can let go of my neediness and give her the space to grow alongside of me and to follow me, to submit to me, to obey me, to do what it is that I'm asking of her, when I can have the patience that she needs to let herself work through this. Again, she needs this whole cycle. We can go to sleep as men, wake up, and sometimes be different, to change, we can work through things sometimes in a day that'll take her a whole month. So if you're a man who is leading a woman, if you are a dominant man who has a submissive, or you want to be a dominant in a dom-sub relationship, go slowly with her. Be patient with her. She will need the time. Now, you can command, you can force, but the response that you're going to get out of commanding and forcing is going to be a performance. It's going to be inauthentic, because she cannot always immediately obey and do it from a place of authenticity. She might need to sort some things out inside of herself to be able to follow you. And in order for you to give her the space for that obedience to be real, means that you need to let her go through this at her own pace. And that's okay. It's a good thing. It's also why these dynamics work so well and tend to, frankly, work better inside of devoted long-term relationships. If we are thinking that we're going to get everything that we want in a brand new relationship in a period of just a month or two, and now everything is going to be complete in this dom-sub dynamic, you've got another thing coming for you. Because if you move too quickly, somewhere along the line, I guarantee you there is self-abandonment, people-pleasing, and other sorts of destructive patterns at play. And then those are going to have to be unwound later. And that is tougher than doing it right the first time. It's why I'm teaching you this here today. Give her space to work through things at her pace and allow this cycle to do its work. Because for us, being able to get a good night's sleep, wake up and feel better and feel stronger and have worked through something, she can do the same thing, but she needs to go through that 28-day cycle of going to sleep and waking back up. Tracking her cycle is also a way to really deepen trust and acceptance, and it gives a woman more of a reason to submit to your leadership. It gives her something to submit to. Because if you've ever listened to this podcast before, you've heard me say this, I don't know how many times, but dominance is not about control. It's not about force. It's about creating safety and creating space for her submission. A woman will naturally submit to a man who is a dominant man. She will naturally submit. It's the way that her biology works. And her cycle isn't an obstacle. It's not a problem. It's a roadmap that helps you understand how her mind works, how her body works, how her emotions work. When you work with the cycle rather than working against it, you can have an understanding of what's actually going on with her. That builds trust. It creates safety. And when she feels deeply seen and deeply held in this way, accepted in this way, she's going to want to submit more deeply, more freely, and more completely. Now, in my experience, most women do not have acceptance around their hormonal cycle and the way that they change from day to day. They try to force themselves into acting, living, and being the same every day. That's what they think they're supposed to do. One of the biggest reasons that this is so profoundly impactful is that when we can, as dominant men, learn and understand more about how she actually works, and then bring acceptance to her in that. In a lot of cases, this is going to be the first time that this has ever felt or been accepted around her in her life. That in and of itself is profoundly healing. But most women haven't even considered a life where she can honor this cycle, where she can work with it, where she can accept it, much less considered how much better she would feel and how much better her life would work if she actually did. But when we can lead her into that, when we can guide her into that, not only do we give her a better experience of her own life, we also gain something back from being able to experience her in a deeper place of self-acceptance. She will be more relaxed. She will be more calm. There will be less of this tension that exists because of the way that she probably lives and acts in resistance to her hormonal reality. The resistance is the cause of a lot of the problems. When we can help lower that resistance, we get to experience a different version of her. And this is where the real magic happens. Now, I'm going to share a brief overview of each stage of the cycle. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into it and some thoughts of how we can work with it, what it looks like to work with these different stages of the cycle. I know most people, men and women both, are really in the dark about how this works. Now, when I started tracking Dawn's cycle, it was in 2020. I'm coming up on almost 5 years of tracking her cycle every single day. It's been over 1,700 days in a row that I've kept track of this. And I wish I could say that I started tracking her cycle because I wanted to have a deeper understanding of her hormonal reality. That's not why I started. The reality is I started doing it because I wanted to know and have a better idea of when she was going to have her period so that I could plan things like dates and vacations around when she was going to be feeling gross and also when we could have more sex. That was why I started. That in and of itself, frankly, guys, is enough of a reason to start paying attention. Because if you can get an idea of the general length of how long it is between her cycles, if she's relatively regular with this, you can know 6 months down the road with pretty good certainty when she is going to be in that menstruation phase. That will help you already. Because if you can not plan things when she's going to be feeling rough, you might have a better experience. That's why I started. And when I started this, I eventually decided that, or maybe even noticed, I should say, that on certain days, certain times of this month when I was keeping track of this, her mood was very different. Now, I think we all know as guys that a woman's mood changes generally before she gets her period and maybe at the beginning of when she has it, that she can maybe be moody, right? So I started really keeping track of this, and I could see a very consistent pattern of when her mood shifted, and that's what really started getting me curious. Like, is this actually just normal? And sure enough, the more that I paid attention to it, the more I realized that her mood went through a very consistent, a very predictable cycle, which got me thinking, well, what else? I started keeping track of her libido. Libido went through a very consistent, very predictable cycle. And this is when I started to realize that I could be more proactive with how I led her. If I wanted to plan things where I wanted us to have a good time, and I could plan those during the time of the month when it would be more of a natural thing that she's going to be higher energy, better mood, more libido. I could plan things like that. I could also know that for this week or 10 days, towards the end of her luteal phase and into the first few days of her period, when her mood might be a little bit lower, that I could plan things. I could lead in a way that allowed more space, more patience, more calmness. I started to work with this, and not only did we start to interact better, she started to calm down a little bit. A lot of the stress and the tension that she was under really started to change because she wasn't being led into or trying to force herself into situations that weren't suiting the reality of how she felt. Because when your hormones change, your emotions change. The way that you feel and interact with everything in your life changes when your hormones change. And again, her hormones are changing every single day. So I started tracking this because I wanted to know something for me. And what it really ended up doing was helping me accept her more, helping to look at her and see the reality of what she was feeling rather than being upset that she wasn't the same as she was yesterday. I mean, my God, every guy knows what it's like to have your woman react totally differently to you today than she did 2 days ago when it seems like everything's the same. And you're like, well, what the hell happened? Well, what happened is probably that her entire hormonal reality inside of herself changed, and she doesn't get it. She doesn't know it's happening either. So being able to be proactive with this makes a massive, massive difference. If you want to get started in tracking this, there are all sorts of apps out there now. I'm not even going to recommend them because they change so fast. But you can find an app for your phone. You can do this together with her, or you can just do it on your own. I encourage you, maybe at the beginning, to just do it on your own so you can start gaining some understanding. All you really need to know is when her last period started, or if you don't know that, wait until the next one starts. And just start keeping track of how long they are. Maybe make a note of how her mood is. I would just do a subjective number from 0 to 10. 0 being the crankiest day that I've ever experienced, and 10 being the most sunny, giggly, happy that she's ever been. So start with just paying attention. Just paying attention is where this all begins. As you do this and you start to see how she shifts and changes, having an understanding of what's going on in the different phases inside of her will make a big difference. So right now I'm going to take a few minutes to go through each one of the phases of her cycle and give you an idea of what it looks like, but then also how you can lead her and understand her in that phase as a man, as a dominant, when you are working with her. So the menstrual phase, again, this is day 1 of any cycle, guys, is the day that her her period starts. That's when you start day 1. So the first 5, 6, 7 days depends on her and her own particular body, how long that lasts. This is when all of her hormones are at their lowest. This is when her energy is at its lowest. It's when her mood is down. Her just overall vibrancy is going to be at its lowest. And again, back to those analogies, this is winter time. This is her sleep. What she's going to need in winter, in sleep, is the equivalent of a pillow, a fireplace, a blanket, a couch. Being encouraged to slow down, to relax, to sit still, to take a couple days off of working out. Maybe you take over a little bit more of the work around the house. You take some things off of her plate during this. You want to give her space. You want to give her some space. Now, space doesn't mean withdrawing. It doesn't mean shutting yourself off from her. It means really just having some patience, letting her be. I know during this phase for Dawn, sometimes she likes to just spend a lot of time sitting in bed reading or sitting outside in the sunshine if it's nice outside. Give her that space that she needs. with still being present with her. Don't let her withdrawal, her low energy, don't make it about yourself. Don't take it personally. This is just her having a normal experience. If you make it about yourself because she's maybe not as affectionate, she's not as sexual, she doesn't interact or engage with you in the same way, you're just disapproving of the reality of how she is and how she's feeling. So acceptance of this means just giving her that space, still being present, showing up for her. And again, she might not have as much to give back to you during this phase. She may not have as much gratitude. You may do more of the stuff and allow her to slow down and do less. And you probably aren't going to get as much gratitude and affection back from her. It's okay. What you're doing is trusting her, and you're giving her a chance to see that you are okay when she just lets herself rest. Offer comfort in this phase. She's probably going to need or appreciate more hugs. Emotional comfort. The real power in the menstruation phase for men is the power of being able to lead her when she is not following you. The leadership is the presence. The leadership is staying grounded. The leadership is just making sure that everything keeps going in her life and doing everything you can to give her the space to slow down. Now, she may not live a life that allows for her to just lay in bed all day during this phase. She might still have work she needs to do. She may still have things she needs to take care of. But what can you do to give her more space, a little bit more time to relax? When you do this, what happens is that she will be able to release, let go, calm herself down. Your calm, your grounded presence, your okayness, your solidity in this phase is a crucial foundation for her submission to you. This is when she gets to see you being the same every day. Again, she needs to be able to accept that she isn't the same every day. But in order for her to really let go of that expectation of herself and to accept herself as she is, she's going to need to see that you can still show up even when she slows down. Don't make her ask for her rest, relaxation. Don't make her ask for permission. Be proactive here. Be the one to suggest it, or maybe even command it. Here's a place where you can deploy commanding, even forceful nature of dominance in a way that's supportive rather than destructive. No, baby girl, you're going to go lay down right now and rest. I'm going to take care of doing the dishes. I'm going to take care of the kids. I'm going to take care of this thing for you. I want you to go lay down and rest. This is how you get to mirror acceptance to her and give her an opportunity then to calm down, relax, and accept the fact that she has less energy and that it's okay for her to slow down. Sleep is the time when we get to reset, when we get to start over, when we get to process. So much happens in sleep, and this phase of her cycle is her sleep. So the more that we can allow her that opportunity, the more she comes out of it with more energy, with more aliveness, and she moves into that second phase. Now, the second phase of the cycle is called the follicular phase. Now, this is springtime. This is morning. This is the waking up. In this phase, her hormone levels are starting to rise at the same time that her energy is coming up. Her playfulness will probably come back. And the more that she's in acceptance of the need for rest in that first phase, the more over time you will see of your woman becoming more playful, more feeling more free, more confident, and more open in this springtime phase, in this morning phase of her cycle. This is when she's generally going to be the most open to new experiences. This is a time for learning. This is a time for deeper connection. And as her dominant, this is a time when you can maybe introduce new things. You can introduce new ideas, new places that you want to go, new objectives for the relationship, new kinks that you want to explore in the bedroom. If you can bring these things up when she is in the follicular phase, you're going to have a more receptive partner for them. This is when she's going to tend to be a little bit more receptive to challenge. This is when you can be more playful and more flirtatious with her. This is when you can plan things that are going to take more energy. Not only does this, again, support the reality of how she's feeling, it also gives you an opportunity to then experience her in a deeper submission to you, because you are now working with the energy that's present. And the more that you've accepted her in her sleep phase, in her winter phase, the more energy will be present as she comes into this springtime phase, into this follicular phase. When she moves into her ovulation phase, this is the middle of summer. This is kind of the peak of energy. This is the middle of the day. This is when everything is kind of at its brightest. That ovulation phase will tend to happen sometime around day 15 to 18 on average. I'll talk at the end about how you know when she's switching between phases of her cycle for sure. But at this ovulation phase, she's primed for connection. Her sexual desire is at its highest. Her confidence, her emotional openness, everything about her energy is going to be at its peak during this ovulation phase. Now, we all have interacted with a woman who is ovulating, whether you know it or not. This is generally when you just feel that intensity of the connection, of the energy, of the sexuality of a woman. In our relationship, even before we started tracking this, even before we started paying attention to when she was ovulating, it was still pretty obvious. And you will know this if you look and pay attention. There tends to just be times when she's just all there, or maybe all over you. This is probably when she's ovulating. This is also the point in her cycle where your presence, your dominance can be and needs to be at its most commanding. It's where she's going to need your edge. It's where she's going to crave your clarity and your decisiveness. This is when she's going to be the most open. Again, this is the middle of the day. This is when she's fully alert, fully awake, and fully available to you. Sexual energy is going to be at its highest. This is when you can probably channel some of the more intense experiences that you want to have together. When you can bring your energy and match up with her peak, not only will you give her this feeling of being profoundly understood, but you will also be able to engage together with her in these peak experiences. When you are wise about how you deploy your dominance and you bring the most intensity at the times when the most openness and energy is present, this is when you can move what seems like leaps and bounds in your dynamic and in your relationship in a very short amount of time. And the reality is the ovulation phase is a very short amount of time. It's generally a couple days. It's a few days when she's at that absolute peak. Now she's building towards it in the follicular phase, and there's a lot of openness, and it's getting closer and closer to ovulation. And then we're in that ovulation window, which also, if you are trying to get pregnant or trying not to get pregnant, this is the time when she is at her most fertile. Also valuable to know and understand if you are either wanting to have children or wanting to not have children. But your ability to meet her intensity, to guide her intensity, to encourage and celebrate her intensity in this phase will also give you more energy, more trust to fuel her surrender and her submission in the other phases. This is where you can show her that her power, her expressiveness, her voice, and her submission coexist, that they aren't in competition with each other, but they are really things that work together. And then the fourth phase, the final phase of the cycle, is the luteal phase, which starts at the end of the ovulation window and continues until the beginning of her next period, her next menstruation. This is the longest of the phases, which can seem a little bit maddening at times. But again, acceptance makes this so much better. During this luteal phase, her body is going through an understanding that the egg that was released during the follicular phase, that was made it to the uterus during the ovulation phase, is not fertilized, and now it needs to be removed and shed from the body. There's a point in every woman's luteal phase that we have pathologized as a society and labeled as premenstrual syndrome, PMS. This is the place in her cycle where her body recognizes she's not pregnant and her hormones crash. Now, for us and for Dawn, that is somewhere in the window of day 22, 23, 24, maybe day 25, if she's on a little bit longer cycle, because for her, these range between 28 and 31 days most of the time. This is an overnight, sometimes like a moment to moment thing with her, where she will seem very vibrant and alive and happy and engaging, and then something will just switch. And I can feel it. I can see it in her eyes. I've just gotten to know this very well. This is a big, big, big hormone crash that happens right at this moment. So needless to say, during this luteal phase, your submissive will probably feel pretty emotionally raw. She will be more resistant to submission. She will probably feel more insecurity in herself. There will be more emotional volatility in this phase of her cycle, especially as she moves through it towards the end of the luteal phase. You will notice a very marked shift in a woman during her luteal phase in her emotional reality. Again, this is not abnormal. This is a part of how she's built. It's a part of how she's made. The luteal phase is when we tend to do the most damage as men to our women in our relationships, and therefore do the most damage to the relationship as a whole. Why? Because we get very reactive. This luteal phase and the way that women behave during the luteal phase is very triggering to the part of us that is afraid of the loss of love. It's very triggering to our own insecurity as a man. This is why we have to do our work so that we can stay still, steady, calm, confident, grounded, and stay in our dominant energy, even when she starts to get more agitated, when she starts to be more raw. Now, the reality of what happens through this phase, when we can, as the dominant, stay solid, when we can stay emotionally grounded, when we can remain stable, is that she will push up against our edge. She will test your dominance like crazy during this. What she's really doing is seeking reassurance. She's seeking comfort, and she's seeking to find out if you're strong enough for her to be all of how she is. When the relationship and the dynamic builds trust through your acceptance of her, especially during this phase, what you'll notice is that the volatility will change. The energy that she brings will change. The trust will deepen. She will soften a little bit more. Now, she will still have her ups and downs in this phase. This never goes away. It's not supposed to. The the value of this phase is that in her reactivity, in her insecurity, in her emotionality, she's going to learn. Again, we're talking about the season of fall here, when things are falling away. What she can do, and what's so powerful during this luteal phase for a woman, is that she can tune into the things that are going on in her life that need to be let go of, that she's able to let go of, that she's able to allow to fall away, so that as she goes into winter, she can sleep and reset and come out of the next menstruation phase with more vibrancy, more aliveness, and more detached from whatever she's able to leave behind because of what agitates her in this luteal phase. So this is not a problem. This isn't a something to be gotten rid of. You need this, she needs this. This is a valuable part of her overall reality. And acceptance of it makes it so much different. When you both value what happens during this phase, and there's an acceptance of the fact that it's going to come with some swings, you can really start to gain together the benefits that her luteal phase offers to you. You will need to have done your work around reactivity, around inner dominance and inner strength, because this is the time, again, when those tests are going to come. She's looking for the solidity in you for her to let go. She isn't just trying to be mean to you. It might come across that way. It might feel that way. That's why you have to do your own work. But what she really needs is your stability. She needs your strength. And in this phase, you'll want to provide firm structure. You will want to provide gentle guidance. You may be a little bit more forgiving with the correction of her. The way that you approach dominance in this luteal phase, when you are in acceptance of it and you're working with it, you may have a little bit more grace, a little more patience. Whereas during the follicular phase, during the ovulation phase, you can be a little bit more strict. You can be a little bit more commanding and bring a more of an edge to your dominance. If you try to do the same thing in her luteal phase, especially towards the end of it, you're going to end up working against your own better interest. So being aware of the fact that grace during this period is helpful. Not that you're just going to let her get away with things, but maybe you can just be patient with it and wait until she's coming back into her next follicular phase and bring up whatever it is that you are learning or seeing or what's happening. If there's something that happens during this luteal phase that really needs to be addressed, sometimes just taking it, setting it aside, and coming back to it with intentionality, so you are responding to it in alignment with her hormonal reality rather than reacting to it in the moment, you'll have a much better outcome. Think about it this way. If you've ever been in an argument when you're tired, things can get said that maybe are not the full truth of what is meant. But the fact that you're tired can cause these arguments to go downhill. If you look at her luteal phase, like the evening, like she's tired, like she's about to go to sleep, let her go to sleep. And then when she wakes up, then you can come back around to this and say, whatever it is that needs to be addressed, you can address it, but you can do it at a point and in a way that is more suited to connection rather than suited to disconnection. So keeping track of her cycle makes you a better dominant because it helps you get to know the woman who you are leading. It helps you come to an understanding of this human being. Paying attention to the reality of how she changes throughout the month will give you a different experience and a different ability to bring your dominance in a way that's suited to her emotional reality, to her hormonal reality. This is an act of mastery of understanding, of intuition. It's not a way that you get to have more control and force things into how you want them to be. This is about really being able to come alongside of the person with whom you are engaging in this power exchange dynamic and leading her by standing beside her, putting your arm around her and taking her where you want to go, creating what you want out of this relationship by working with the reality of her cycle. So if you want to get started with this, again, my number one tip is just start getting an idea of how long her cycle is. Do this for a few months. Maybe you do this together with her. Maybe you do this separately and you just keep track of this on your own. Pay attention to how she changes and what is normal for her in these different phases and how you can work with how she is rather than expecting her to be different than how she is. Once you get a little bit deeper into this, I encourage you to pick up a basal body temperature thermometer, especially once you're working together in this. What Dawn does every morning, a part of our rituals, a part of our routine, she wakes up every morning and takes her temperature. And not just with any thermometer, these basal body temperature thermometers, they're pretty inexpensive. You can get them off of Amazon for probably $15, maybe $20. And it gives you a very accurate temperature reading down to like the hundredth of a degree. And you want to take this first thing in the morning when she wakes up, like before she gets out of bed. So this thermometer sits on Dawn's nightstand when we travel. It comes with us. It's in the hotel. It's in the Airbnb. It goes everywhere with us. First thing she does when she wakes up in the morning is takes her temperature, texts it to me along with her good morning. Every single morning. We started doing this about 3 years ago now. So we're probably on about 1,000 days worth of tracking her temperature every morning. The reason you track the temperature is that you will notice temperature fluctuations with the different phases of her cycle. You will notice that during the menstruation and follicular phase, there's a slow, gradual, general descent in temperature. When she ovulates, you'll have a very big spike in temperature. You'll know that you have reached the ovulation phase. And then you will notice different fluctuations throughout her luteal phase. For example, a little bit earlier, I mentioned that Dawn has this period of time around day 22 through 24 where she can be especially emotionally volatile. And this coincides with a dip in her temperature that happens right around that time. It's a part of how I can tune into where she's at and what is happening with her. Now, it doesn't always work this way, but it's a tool towards more understanding. It helps me maybe be a little bit more prepared. It also helps me understand where she's at. If she's moving into ovulation, I know that because when she texts me her temperature in the morning, I can see that. It also matches up with what I'm feeling in her and the mood that she's been in, the energy that she's been carrying. And as we move through our lives, as a woman moves through her life, she also reaches a point where she goes into menopause. Now, menopause, perimenopause is the onset of menopause, and then menopause itself is the period where eventually she stops having periods at all. And when you have good data, when you've been paying attention to her hormonal cycle, we will have a very clear idea of when she starts to hit perimenopause. And then we can start looking at things like hormone replacement therapy if it's necessary. We can start paying attention to how her mood, her libido, her sleep, different parts of her hormonal reality are changing as she moves into that perimenopause and eventually menopausal stage of life. So paying attention to this also helps you be proactive with health. It brings acceptance to the emotional reality. And it really, more than anything, just puts both you and your submissive in a position where you are in acceptance of how she is. it makes so much more sense why she acts the way she acts when you understand that it's a normal flow of how her hormones are changing on a day-to-day basis throughout her month. And to this end, we're creating a space as a dominant where she feels more safe. She feels more seen. She feels more accepted. She feels more loved. And this creates the space for her to let go more. When people look at our lives and see how deeply and completely Dawn has surrendered to me, how deep her submission really runs, and I'm talking about in ways beyond what you've probably ever even seen from us through this podcast or through our social media, the fact that we work with her normal hormonal cycle is a massive factor in why our dynamic is as deep as it is and why our relationship is as deep as it is. Because again, true leadership, true dominance is about knowing, it's about guiding, it's about intuition, and it's about being able to lead from reality. When you can master your ability to be present with reality, to be able to be with what is, and then guide your submissive forward to a better life, her devotion, her submission, her surrender is inevitable because of what you're doing together. I appreciate you tuning in for this episode. Again, check down in the show notes. I've got a gift for you that goes along with this episode that will help put some visual to some of this and give you something to check back to and lean back in on. And I'm curious to hear in the show notes, especially as you go forward, cut. And I would love to hear in the comments, especially as you go forward with this, how you're implementing it, what you're noticing, and what you got out of hearing and learning about her cycle in this episode. Also, please, if you're listening to us on Apple or on Spotify, give us a review. Spotify, you can leave comments. YouTube, we appreciate you following, subscribing to us on YouTube, and leaving comments. Any of that helps other people find this podcast and this content. And the more that we can spread this message of loving, devotional dominance and submission, the wider we want it to go. So again, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you very much, and we'll see you next time.